Today's guest is Joe Richardson. Incredibly, Joe is the fifth generation at Jos Richardson and Son, a business that's been operating for 135 years. The business started out delivering coal all the way back in the 19th century and is now an operator of incredible forecourts, including the amazing Glews Services. Here's Joe Richardson. Joe, thank you very much for joining me. I've had the pleasure of going up to your sites a number of times and known you probably for 5 or 6 years now, something along those lines. So really great to have you here. I'm very interested to hear how you went from starting in 1892 to being the business that you are today.
Thanks for having me, Mark. It's a pleasure to be doing this with you. So we did start in 1892. My great-grandfather, a guy called Joseph Richardson, which was abbreviated to Jos in those days. So that's where the Jos Richardson comes from. He was a shipping manager at the port of Goole and decided he needed some extra money for some reason. And he started importing coal on the canal and basically just selling it locally by horse and cart as some additional income. And it just grew from there, really. So he actually, bizarrely, it was probably in his 40s when he decided to do that. And he never actually left his job as a shipping manager. He kept his job on pretty much all the way through until he died. But by that time, his son was old enough. Henry Richardson was old enough to join. And so he was the one that grew the business really throughout the early part of the 20th century. So basically, they were wholesalers of coal and also had their own retail rounds as well, where they would have coalmen delivering to houses. But at one point, I think at the height of it all, in let's say between the 1930s and the 1950s, they got to a fleet of 20 vehicles and they were doing wholesale to schools, hospitals, other factories, and they were doing wholesale to other people who had their own retail round, other coalmen, and they also had about half a dozen of their own rounds themselves. And basically that was the business, and it was doing okay. They tried another couple of things in the 50s and 60s, some sort of famous family stories. They had to go at a travel agency in York, but I don't know what happened there. Obviously, it wasn't very successful because it didn't last. On the back of the coal rounds, they actually set up a credit loan business because in those days, people would not always pay for the coal immediately. So it became almost the coal's on credit and you just pay a little bit off each week. So that naturally allowed them to go into the business. And then it was by the 1970s, my dad was a young man starting a family, and there was probably too many family members as shareholders, and some of them was falling out with each other. And it was also a declining business because throughout the 1970s, there'd been a lot of industrial unrest. Gas was really coming on as an alternative replacement to coal. And my dad just didn't see that it was going to be enough to keep him in a decent standard of living. So he persuaded a local family, the Glews family, to sell a garage to him on the outskirts of Goole. And at that point, it was a normal country garage doing service and MOT, a couple of fuel pumps, selling used cars. It had a little bit of land with it, about an acre, not much. And my dad thought he was going to get into general haulage because he knew a fair bit about haulage with the coal wagons. And he thought, actually, what I'll do is I'll just diversify into general haulage. But what he ended up doing once he got his feet under the table of the dealership, we thought, actually, there's more into this car operation than meets the eye. He was actually quite a mechanical man anyway, so he liked engines. He used to have a rally driving hobby in his youth, and I think he thought, I'm not going to get as dirty and he's sitting in an office selling cars, and so that's what he did. And throughout the 80s, he added a Vauxhall and a Peugeot dealership to that site, and he then built a new Shell petrol station in the early 90s, and that was pretty much his career, really. One of his shrewdest moves was buying a lot of land around the dealership because it was by a junction of a motorway, but he never actually developed it out. That was to come later. So by the time he got all his debts paid off, that took him to the end of the 90s, the millennium. He was just happy running it, not making any more major decisions. And I joined in 2004 from 5 years working in industry after I graduated in 1999. And I looked at the business and thought, I don't really know much about cars or sales or mechanics. Wasn't that interested in the car dealership side of the business. And I thought the growth was going to be in fuel and convenience, basically. I'd looked at what some people were just starting to do in shops. And this was really early days in terms of the big shops and all that sort of stuff. But I just thought that's what we should be doing. So I just decided to try and add more sites slowly but surely in a family business type way. We didn't take on a load of debt to do it really. And we just bought a site, redeveloped it, and went from there. And we find ourselves now 20 years later with 11 locations and some very good fuel and convenience sites.
You employ approximately 180 people across 11 locations.
It's probably a touch more than 180, but certainly no less. There's obviously a lot of part-time in that as well, but it's still a big administrative task. And we are proud of the fact that we've got some very long-standing employees. I know that that turnover rate is much better than the industry average, just because we have that family business approach still. There's downsides to that as well, but I think there's a lot of upsides.
You've got a business degree background?
Yes, I did business management at Newcastle. Graduated in '99, a long time ago. Not sure how much of it I applied, but that was my background. I then went into a graduate job at a company called Centrica, which was a utility company. It still is around, actually, Centrica.
They're in British Gas, right?
They're British Gas. I've done 5 years. I've done a couple of years in London, a couple of years in Manchester, and my old man, every time I went back for a weekend, would say, "What's your plans? If you're not coming back, I need to start thinking about what I'm doing." He'd have been mid to late 50s by that point. And I just said, yeah, I think ultimately I've had a good look at the corporate world now, but ultimately I think I'll regret not having a go at the family business. And that's what we did.
It is a story I've heard before. Come out of university, go to work, and eventually you fall into the family business. At that stage, you've mentioned to me before, and having been to Glews, I can't see how it could ever be described as this, but I think it's been described as a typical country garage back then. Was that the case when you joined the business?
The only stuff we had was at Glews. So there was the Vauxhall dealership, which was the original Glews garage. Then he bought a plot of land next door in the early 90s and built a Peugeot dealership. And then what happened in the late 80s and 90s, a developer came along and got planning permission for a new petrol station, a fast food restaurant, and a hotel, all on land that we didn't own at the time. So my dad already had a Texaco petrol station, which was attached to the dealership property. It was a smaller type petrol station. And obviously he was very worried, thinking someone's going to come and build a brand new petrol station right on my doorstep. So after a little bit of argy-bargy and falling out, he ended up doing a deal with the developer, and he bought the plot of land off the developer, and he built the Shell petrol station, which is there now. We've extended it a couple of times since and changed it round. That was his original purchase. In those days, obviously interest rates were a lot higher and the cost of borrowing was very high. But the oil companies would do 10-year interest-free loans. So he got a major injection of capital from Shell and also some bank lending as well. And that's what allowed him to build the site. And then what you did is through your oil company deals, you paid that money back throughout. The Shell must have worked into the margin somehow, and that's how you paid it back over that 10-year period. So by year 2000, I think he was basically paid up and all his debts gone, and he was happy. By that point, it stopped making any major decisions in terms of new sites or anything like that. He was happy. He was just happy being a Gould businessman, having a Vauxhall and a Peugeot dealership and a Shell petrol station, serving his local customers and being a man in the community. And that was him.
If he didn't manage to get hold of that land, none of this might have happened.
None of this would happen. And I remember when you were saying what was there before, and I do remember cutting the grass and things like that in the 80s, and literally all was the old saying, it was just all fields around it and all that sort of. So I remember the days before the McDonald's, before the hotel, before the new petrol station. Yeah, so he was the one who decided to say yes, and I'll do it. Fair play to him. And he also bought some land around the dealership, which has allowed us to do things since the lorry park and the truck and the HGV fuel and the redevelopment that we're doing now.
We'll definitely come back to that redevelopment at some point, because I drove past it the other day and it looked like you were building a new city. So I was I was like, okay, that's what they're doing. And that's definitely something we should come back to. In terms of going from one site to where you are, 11 locations, what made you decide to take the leap to take a second site on and a third site and so on?
Over the course of a few weekends coming back from Manchester and talking about what I would do if I joined, there was a site right on the East Coast, a place called Primrose Valley, which we'd heard was up for sale. And Dad thought it was a good idea for me to come back and cut my teeth up there, basically, which is 45 miles away from Goole, and see if I liked it. I could also make mistakes and not be as visible if I'd made those mistakes in Goole to all the existing staff, I think. And so that's how he fitted me in, really. And so we went and bought this site, which at the time it still is a small site, a bit very rural. The guy sold it. We immediately closed down the service and MOT bays. We didn't want to do that side of it up there. We just wanted the fuel and the shop. And then I learned, that's how I cut my teeth. For the first year or two, I was literally doing everything. Would be covering shifts occasionally, would be cashing up, would be doing the shop orders. I had a manager that I appointed as well, but we'd be doing it together. And then after about the first year of doing that, I thought, okay, we've got this now. We can think about expansion. And so it got to sort of 2000 and end of 2005-06. We ended up buying a site up the road. A guy was looking to retire. That's Filey service station. That's about 4 miles away from Primrose Valley. And then we did redevelopment projects on both those sites and knocked through into the garage in one case and built a bigger shop. And then at Filey, we put a big extension on the back of the building and created a shop 3 times as large. And of course, this was all coming from the profits we'd made. There was no real bank lending to fund any of this at the time. So that's why it was quite slow and steady. I must admit, I didn't understand anything really in those days. I was only mid to late 20s about taking on loads of debt and having massive expansion drives and all that sort of stuff. It was just still in a very family business, slow and steady type way. And that's when I decided to actually go to the bank and borrow some money. And we bought 2 sites in the space of 6 months of each other, which were big redevelopment projects as well. And so that's when we did borrow a fair bit of money, or for me, what I thought was a fair bit of money. I took it very personally. That was my money to pay back. And that was Long's Corner and York Road Garage. And ever since then, when it just started to snowball, and we've always kept it fairly conservative in terms of our borrowing ratio. But in that time, we redeveloped sites, we picked up a few more, and we managed to do the major project at Goole, which was knock down the Peugeot dealership, build a 7-lane HGV fueling facility, and then parking for 80 vehicles. And that's really the major thing we've done. We had to also part fund a roundabout on the highway to make the access and egress better for the site. So that's when we again went back and borrowed some more money to fund to that. I'm glad to say, and of course you don't know this at the time, we were borrowing money in an interest rate environment which was very benign. What was it, 0.5% for 10 years or more? So we got on and did it. We've had another couple of sites since then. We've also added our only dry site, so it's just pure convenience store, a place called Gilberdyke. And that's where we are. I've often toyed with the idea of taking on more debt and going on a massive expansion drive into different geographical locations, but we just never felt it's the right thing for us. We would probably have to go to a com-op model, I imagine, rather than directly employing people. And I'm not discounting it. It's just not where I've personally wanted to take it.
Your expansion, I know it's not 180 sites or something like that, but
yes,
when you're going from 1 to 2, you're basically growing your business 100%. When you're going from 2 to 4, you're doing the same thing. These are quite large expansions. Do you think that having them all in a similar location, I'm sure there has been stress and problems, don't get me wrong, but do you think that's made it easier for you to be successful, the fact that everything is sat in one geographical region?
absolutely, Mark. We've never wanted to lose control of our standards. I'm sat in my garden office at home now, and I'm absolutely certain that I could go to any of my sites now and I'd be happy with the standards, more than happy. With me having a critical eye in retail, I would find stuff that could be improved, but not necessarily that the customer would be aware of. But I do see some standards in petrol stations around the country, and you think some people have, on the national stage, maybe don't have as good a standards. And I think that's something that I've always been very aware of, especially when we're running big convenience stores. We've got 5 sites that do over £50,000 a week in the shop. So we've always focused on quality and having good C-stores, good fuel offer. I hit upon quite early, 10, 12 years ago, that if we were going to own a petrol station, we wanted a good shop, good fuel and a good valeting offer, and plenty of space for parking. And obviously these things just don't fall off trees. So it's been more difficult, I would say, for us to acquire sites, because I've been the one that have been trying to network, find out when people are retiring, trying to oil the wheels before they're ready to sell, get them to know me and feel comfortable selling to another family business. Obviously, a lot of the deals that get done when packages of 10, 20, 50 sites go in one go, if it's a CMA disposal or an oil company's decided to just get rid of a batch, we could never pretend to be in that market. That's a different level of operating in terms of the finance required and the debt required, and maybe being prepared to take on different investors with people with different shareholdings, etc. So really, we've only been able to pick off ones from people who have been retiring, basically, and we just so happen to be getting these at a time when the market was really developing. And even though we weren't massively aware of it at the time, we were probably getting quite good deals, as what turned out to be a growth sector over the last 10 years.
Something I really wanted to ask about was the new to market sites, new to industry sites, and the difference between going and buying a petrol station and turning it into your vision, which you described there as good fuel offer, good shop offer, and good valeting offer. And I know that you've got certain values and structures in place with the team, which I'll come to in a minute as well. How different is it going and doing it yourself versus having a platform to work with an existing station and an existing customer base that already exists there?
It's hugely different. And the main difference is really the difficulty of getting planning for anything these days. The planning process is arduous and frustrating and confusing, and often doesn't seem to make much sense. So, you can waste a year to 18 months of your life just getting planning for something. That's one of the main differences. The other difference is finding the right location. An existing petrol station, even if it's in need of redevelopment or a bigger shop, you've got a level of trade there that you're sure is going to stick with you, and it's already got its volume and it's already on the existing road network. So here you'll be starting completely afresh. So you've got to do a lot more work in terms of trying to predict trade and volumes, and things you can do are obviously traffic counts and what have you. And then there are other statistical means of getting data for predicting shop sales and things like that. So we've done all that. And then it's also just constantly talking to agents and this, that, and the other. There's a bun fight for the best sites. And again, being a family business, we don't have access to all these predictive models of volume and shop sales. And some of the bigger companies will just have some amazing software where you can just type in a postcode and it gives you all sorts of information in terms of predicted sales and demographics and things like that. So we again feel that we're a little bit disadvantaged in that sense. But on this particular one, we're doing in North Yorkshire, Malton, I just ultimately decided, I've thought about it long enough. I've always wanted to do one. This is the one. So that's where we got to.
Once that's open and up and running, how do you make sure that what are the things you need to do to make sure that the customers actually come and use the site for the first couple of months?
Yeah, we've never actually done one yet. So the one we're doing is we've just received the tenders back, and so we should be starting on site in September in terms of construction. But one of the beauties of our industry is that you can just have, for a period of time, cheaper fuel than everyone else. And I think you wouldn't want to sustain that in the long term, because you're probably doing it no margin or very little margin. But that's hopefully going to give you an immediate impact in terms of just driving footfall to the site. I also think customers are just interested when things are getting built locally. They've seen it for 6 months getting built. It becomes a talking point. And so when you have a launch, it drives footfall to the site just because it's something new and exciting. But we will do all the other stuff: leaflet drops, radio, launch events, social media, just to keep it going. And we will link with the main brands as well to tap into their marketing assets as well. So whichever shop supplier and coffee and food to go supplier we end up going with, we'll expect them to do their own marketing initiatives, and we'll piggyback on a lot of that as well.
I suppose that is similar with existing sites or sites that have been refurbished and so on, or where you're putting in a new brand. You have those options, don't you, to try and increase the footfall of that site through some of those brand partnerships that you've got.
Yes.
Of which I know you've got quite a few. One of which you've got, which was of particular interest to me, was Stone Willie's Kitchen. This is a Yorkshire brand, isn't it? And you're a proper Yorkshire boy.
Yeah, I'm a proper Yorkshire boy. It's a Yorkshire company, certainly. I don't think they stop themselves from going outside the Yorkshire boundaries. I know they've got sites elsewhere in the UK, but their heartland is definitely Yorkshire. So Stone Willis is a grab and go concept, which I really like. They do breakfast muffins, they do lunchtime wraps, they do pizza slices and other savoury things like that. It's just a really quality product. It's grab and go, so it goes into a heated cabinet where the kitchen staff are preparing it in the back and then they bring it out. And it has a loyal following. And I think it's just something that offers something a little bit different. We do also do food to go on a lot of our sites with Spar on their Daily Deli brand. I just think with Spar, we mainly do breakfast and sausage baps in the morning, and then it goes to the savoury slices. So it might be a chicken tikka slice or a steak slice. This Stone Willis just offers something different. They're more down the wrap and panini and pizza slice end, and I certainly think they complement each other.
How important is it to have local suppliers and keep things in the shop fairly local?
I think as long as their product is of a good quality, that's the thing that people. We have a butcher who delivers some pies into a couple of our sites, and it just gets a loyal following. And but for it to be local and to be marketed as local, I think it has to be quality because it has to already have that local following anyway. Perhaps they've got a bakery or a butcher or another business which is there, and they're just looking to put their product into another retail environment, and so it already maybe had a bit of a loyal following. To be honest, I think sometimes it's overplayed. If I'm honest, Mark, I think most of our sites are standard convenience stores where the vast majority of products are sourced from the main suppliers. But we do definitely have a play with some of the local stuff.
And one of the things you also do at the sites is in post.
Yeah.
It's something I haven't spoken about a lot before. I see it everywhere now, not just in post, but similar services. It seems to be becoming more and more common and a really good profit center for people because otherwise people wouldn't do it. Did they come to you? Is that something you actively wanted to put on the site?
They did come. I think they did come to us actually in the first instance, and they clearly identified the key locations that were the most important to them in terms of our network. And I think we've got it in 5 sites now. And you basically, in terms of the commercials for us, you basically get an annual rent from them, which is not a lot. It doesn't make the difference on a site. But I remember the stats on one particular site were that we'd had 1,500 extra footfall, if that's the right word, users of the lockers in 1 month. So that has driven 1,500 people, potentially, all of which, or certainly a large proportion of which, wouldn't have been coming to your site. You'll never know exactly how many would have come to your site anyway, and you'll never know exactly of those 1,500 how many people have actually then gone into the shop to buy something. But it can't hurt, can it, having 1,500 people driven to your site per month to use some lockers, which are occupying a relatively small. So it's just an add-on service, really.
It can't hurt if you've got the space for these people to park.
Absolutely, yeah.
Which you do at most of your sites. If you're a smaller retailer, going back maybe 5 or 6 years at a PRA meeting, they were talking about back when the latest EV innovation was for all large petrol stations to have at their sites, and there was no description from the government as to what large meant, whether it meant a site like yours, whether it meant volume, or whether it meant just the number of petrol stations that you might own as a business. I remember that a lot of the protests that I saw from retailers was, hold on a minute, I've only got 2 parking bays, or I don't have any parking bays to put this in. And I need those parking bays for people who are coming into my shop because my shop is now X amount of my profit. So yeah, I think it's all part of that same conundrum, isn't it? It's like, how do you optimize the space in your site? How do you optimize the footfall rather than just, I need more people? Because I was talking to David Charmy on the podcast, and he was saying, I don't really want more customers. Like in the shop, sure, but I don't really need more fuel customers. It would probably be detrimental to my site. And that's obviously a very unique site, but every site is unique.
We've noticed in the past, there's a bit of a surprise to me when it first happened, but more than once in the 20 years I've been in the industry, let's say we've got a site down the road that's closed for whatever reason. Let's say they've run out of fuel or they're going through a repump or whatever, and all the fuel volume has been driven to us, and we're majorly busy on the fuel, it actually has a detrimental effect on the shop. And you can understand intuitively why that could be, because people are most people in this country are reasonably fair-minded people, and they're conscious of the fact that someone's behind them in the queue, so they want to get in and just pay for their fuel or whatever and go. And so high fuel sales, unless you've got decent parking, does not always translate to high shop sales.
I myself, I'm a very courteous driver, of course, and I do move my car for people. But if there's nowhere for me to put it, I can't put it anywhere. And ultimately, I will have to just run in the shop. And so it is all about that balance between how much space you have on site and how many things you can put in. And even if it's lockers that aren't taking up a lot of room, the question is that going to have a positive or negative impact on your overall profitability, particularly if it's only paying you a rent and you're not necessarily taking a cut of each customer that comes in.
Yeah.
And I think that logic applies to EV bays, the doggy washes that people are now doing, all of these different things, even air serve, stuff like that. It probably all makes a difference. Let's talk a little bit about the team there, because you've got these 5 C's, which are customers, control, confidence, challenge, and commitment. And I also read, I think you said something like, listen to people who know more than you. They will teach you everything you need to know. I think that came from a Forecourt Trader article. Talk to me about how you manage a team. What's the breakdown on the hierarchy of the business?
Yeah, basically we've got 2 area managers. So each site had a site manager and assistant manager. Some of the bigger sites will have 2 assistant managers, and they've been with us a long time by and large. Then we have 2 area managers, but our area managers are more than, let's say, some of the bigger groups that the area managers have 15 or 16 sites to manage and are largely there as auditors. So when they go to a site, they have to do an audit. Have they fire extinguishers, or are they only checking the pumps all working, etc. Our area manager are expected to get in a lot more, so they're there to help the manager drive sales, drive standards, make sure the customer service is excellent, make sure all the controls on site are, whether it's the cash variances or the lottery variances or ATM variances, it's really working with the manager on a whole range of things, and they will help with HR issues, disciplinary, recruitment. So really, our area managers are more like mini general managers in a sense, that they get involved in a lot more. We have a finance team that sits in an office in a lovely location that you've been to before, Mark, at a place called Brackenhome, and that's probably got 4 or 5 full-time equivalents in doing payroll, accounts. And then there's me at the top, really. My wife helps me on some property matters. We have another person helping us on some property matters. And so it's quite a lean company in that respect. And I think we could grow it. Certainly we could add more sites. We wouldn't need any more area managers. Or we could have 2 or 3, 4 more sites and not really need any more area managers. And we might need another body in the office. But there is potential for some sort of reasonable growth there.
How do you make sure that as a business that now employs 180 odd people in one way, shape or form, that you keep that family business feel?
Yeah, difficult. I think just doing the same things day in, day out. I still keep in touch with all the sites. I don't go to them anywhere near as much as I used to do. I probably average certain sites that are just nearer me. I probably go to once every couple of weeks. Other sites I probably will only get to once a month. But I speak to them on the phone. Every day, the area managers are living the family business message. So they're then relaying that down to the managers in turn, are doing that down to the cashiers. We have a formal induction process, so when anyone new joins, they get an induction pack. There's a lot about our history in there. There's a lot about me and the family. There's a lot about how we operate sites and the standards we expect, almost like a contract between the 2 parties. We'll do this for you, but we expect this in return. And we basically also just, without meaning to sound frivolous, we have a laugh. Of course, we have our issues to deal with. And sometimes these issues have to be taken in the utmost seriousness. But like any business, we get that to deal with. But we try and make the workplace enjoyable. And I would imagine most people that have been with us a long time like the fact that they know who they're working for. It's as simple as that. They don't feel part of a big faceless organisation. And I'm fairly certain that some of the cashiers, if they went and got a job at Aldi or Lidl or whatever, would probably earn 50 to 70p an hour more. But they decide not to. And I think we're not looking to underpay people deliberately, but we can't pay as much as maybe the bigger companies, but we still have a very good staff retention rate. And I think it is just keeping that family business thing going. They get a congratulations card and a voucher from me for 5, 10, 15-year service. We have a Christmas voucher, which the longer they've been with us, the more they get as a high street voucher, and everyone gets a Christmas card. Obviously, we have tragedy in our organisation as well. We've people like it in life have lost people and bereavements or get ill, and we're very on the ball and compassionate when we do things like that as well. So I think it's just all those things that you would do in a family, Mark, really. And that's what keeps it as a family as much as possible.
It is interesting that people will potentially earn more elsewhere, but they choose to work for your business in particular because it's got that family business feel. And you are doing things to help train and challenge them and get them to the next stage where they might want to get to. One of the things you mentioned there was the induction pack. So I'm not saying no one else does it, but that's the first time I've heard of that in a fuel retail business. How did you come up with that idea and that concept?
I think a lot of it stemmed from the idea that we had to give some people some basic training. So obviously they need training on the tills, they need training on how to sell alcohol and lottery. So there was a formality to it anyway, but then we just started adding to it. Some of it was government led, so then the government came in that you had to prove right to work. So the need for us to get photo ID and various other documents. We just basically said we're having all these chats with them anyway. We might as well put some of our stuff in it and make it about us. It just adds that professional feel, basically. Make that person know they're joining a proper company. It's with proper processes.
It's not that I wouldn't expect people to have a training pack or an induction pack at all. It's to have one that has more in it that explains to you a little bit about who you're working for, why it's important, the history of the business. I suppose you have that advantage as well of having such a rich history and so many generations of the family that have worked in there that it's actually really interesting as well. I think people miss a trick with this. Don't get me wrong, I have come across a fair amount. I know David Penny's got his 5Ps. I know John Stevenson's got his values. And there are retailers who are doing this. I think a lot of retailers miss that opportunity to sit and write down what their business actually stands for. And what always amazes me is they've all got the same theme of we want to be a good business, but they're all different. And they're all trying to approach it in a slightly different way. And then they're taking that and they're trying to drive that consistency. And the bigger the business you get, it does become important to drive the consistency of the expectations and how you want those businesses to be run. And I suppose it's that sort of thing that allows you to not visit the sites every day and allow your area managers to get more involved in the day-to-day of the business. A couple of things I wanted to touch on. One of them is the redevelopment. As I said, I drove past it and it looked pretty crazy. There was a lot going on. It's always nice to go past some sort of construction and see people actually working on it. You don't get that driving up and down the motorways.
No, yeah.
You don't get much of that. Tell me about those plans. Tell me about what they are. There's a KFC, there's a Starbucks. This is all setting it up to rent that stuff out to other companies, right?
So the fast foods and the coffee there, the KFC and the Starbucks, that is deals have already been done with tenants who are going to be the operators. That's not our field. The franchisees have multiple sites and their model. On that same site, we've also managed to secure 1,000 kVA of power dedicated for EV charging. So we're going to have an 8-bay, 1,000 kilowatt charging station, which again will be rented out to one of the national CPOs. So that's that. We're also extending at the same time, the same contractors are on with extending the lorry park. At the moment, we can park 80 vehicles. We've got planning to build a lorry park with another 50 vehicles, plus a new shower and toilet block as well. We're really hoping that we can get that parking up to 110, 120 a night. And obviously with the KFC and the Starbucks, the McDonald's, that's already there. Nothing to do with us, the McDonald's, but that's already there. We hope that we can just increase our business basically, and that's what we're on with, yeah. And we've got obviously the new site in Malton to do, which is separate to Goole. Obviously, we've got plenty on, and we're quite excited about the next 12 months.
Yeah, there is a lot. There's some big changes coming to the business, but it's good growth. There's lots of ways you can go about growth, and that can be internally within the store that you have. That can also be buying new sites. But something which you're doing, which is new to me in terms of these conversations, is you're taking the existing land that you have around and around the site and trying to turn it into something which is going to bring in additional income and profit and revenue for the business. So it's something a bit different that I don't talk about too often. In terms of the industry, what worries you the most about the next 5 to 10 years? What keeps you up at night?
I think more about the energy transition than anything else. I think we want to get to a net zero, and we as retailers want to be involved in our. We have a vested interest in our sites being part of that transition. We know it's coming. It's probably the right thing that it's coming. I'm not convinced government clearly and the new government have thought it through properly, and they're now going to have the problem of owning the delivering of some of these commitments they've made. So that's the thing that keeps me up at night more than anything. I still think the good sites, the good locations will have a future no matter what, because there will always be people moving around, and the key locations will still have welfare, food, coffee, convenience, car washing, lockers, something else that we don't even know about yet, Mark. I worry for the smaller sites that are maybe landlocked or haven't got a big shop. And I think as fuel volumes start to decline, as more and more EVs hit the road, you might see, and I'm talking 5 to 10 years on, probably more 10 years than 5, you might see some sites leave the industry, as we saw in the sort of 90s and noughties as the supermarkets closed a load of sites down. And that may happen. But then again, those sites will also react, right? So we've got a site that has relatively small fuel sales and relatively small shop sales. I always think, what would you do if it got tighter and tighter? The first thing we might do, we might go unmanned. We might just turn it into a completely unmanned petrol station, and therefore you could cope with less fuel volume because you wouldn't be employing people, you wouldn't be having a shop to heat and light and all that sort of stuff. So the market's going to change dramatically. I think if I was on my soapbox, I would argue that EVs are actually not that green. And this is the thing that I don't think gets talked about. I'm not making here a case for saying petrol and diesel has to stay forever. But the point I'm trying to make is that the mining process to get these rare earth metals out of the ground in far-flung places of the world is actually quite a carbon-intensive process in itself. And do we really want to replace one digging up of Earth's natural resources with another? But who am I? That's one voice in a whole symphony of voices. So, but that's.
Have you looked at anything else like hydrogen, for example?
We've not looked at hydrogen, but we have actually in this last 6 weeks started selling HVO on the Glews truck stop. Now we're doing actually quite well with it at the minute, but that is largely on the back of one customer who got one particular contract locally, and this contract was with a major company who wanted a green credential. So the fact that we could link with this haulage contractor and say, yes, we can do HVO, we just put it into our old red diesel tanks because we don't sell red diesel anymore. He said he basically went to this national player and said, I can get HVO, please give me the haulage contract. But it's obviously costing them 20-25p a litre more than white diesel, but this particular national firm was prepared to pay the difference, which is obviously because it's part of their PR agenda. So we've tried HVO, we've talked to alternative fuels in terms of hydrogen and CNG at Gull, but that's it. They're just talks at the minute and they've not really gone anywhere.
Someone described to me recently that EV could be the CD in between the cassette tape and your MP3 or your
streaming. Yeah,
I said it could. At the moment, it looks like it could just be the mini disc. I don't know if you remember the mini disc. And
I've got an EV car, I've got an Audi, and it's actually a fine car to drive. I thought I better get one just to see what all the fuss is about, what I'm dealing with. But I'm fortunate enough, I've got a charger installed at home, Mark, and it sits on my drive and it just charges when I'm sleeping. I think that there is a huge swathe of people in the country that it will work for. I just don't know if it works for everyone. And I always use the example of the social care worker who's got 6 visits to do a day, and she's going from one appointment to another appointment. With the greatest respect, those people are not probably going to be able to afford a new EV, and also they haven't got time to be charging it whilst they're going to appointment to appointment. And how many people are going to be like that? There's all sorts of people in all sorts of industries that they just haven't got the time or the ability to charge. And the infrastructure is still, I know chargers are going in left, right, and centre, but the infrastructure is still a long way behind. If you think of the amount of energy needed to keep 3 million vehicles on the road at the moment, it must keep some people up at night about how they're going to generate all this power.
I've got a theory that what will happen if they switch off new petrol and diesel car sales is people will just stop buying cars. Why? Because the cars that are being bought today or have been bought in the last couple of years, they last for longer. They're better built. The brands that, I don't know, people probably laughed at when we were kids. I remember Skoda used to get a really bad rep when we were kids. These are high quality cars that will last you 15, 20 years now, maybe longer. And the fuel is still slightly more efficient, and there are also ways to continue to make that fuel more efficient as well. I think the two things are going to happen. One, people will hold on to their cars for longer. So I don't believe that stopping the sale of those cars in 2030, you're just going to see less car sales. That would be the main thing that will happen. But also, I think you'll start to see a shift from regular grade fuel. I think people want to start moving more into super grades. I think you as a Shell dealer are very well positioned to take advantage of that because people love V-Power, of course. I think you'll see people saying, I've got to keep this car running longer. Instead of going and spending all that money on EV, and I don't even have a place to put a charger in my house anyway, and I'm going to stick with my car and I'm going to just do everything I can. I'm going to service it every 6 months. So car servicing and is going to be a very good industry to be in. And also, I think V-Power will sell more, or premium grade fuel even without V-Power. These are my theories. No one knows. You could boo them if you want.
No, I think it's very interesting. I think you're right that people will make, you're definitely right about people making their existing cars last longer. So will everyone just go out and buy in 2029 and 2030 a petrol and diesel vehicle? And because we, as a family of 5, we could not make it work for us being totally electric at the moment. My wife's got a hybrid and I've got the EV. And that's pretty much, we're first world problems, aren't we? But that's pretty much the story about everyone we speak to about it. Don't mind having an EV, but we definitely want a backup vehicle that's got petrol or diesel. Interesting. I think Rishi, when he pushed it back to 2035, it was just actually a very practical decision. He just looked at it and go, this isn't going to happen. A bit like the air source heat pumps as well, isn't it? He's saying it's not a bad idea in essence, but it's just too quick and it just can't happen all at once to the timeframes you're asking for. But I think some sites will get into charging and some sites will do quite well out of charging as well. So it's a bit like I was saying earlier, the key sites will be fine. The key strategic location sites will be fine. I think it's other sites that might be the ones that go first.
Yeah, I have heard a complete mix in terms of payback periods. It all depends on what model you go with. There's a completely low risk option of having someone lease out the space on your site, and it's no different from leasing out your land to KFC. You're leasing out a parking spot. Ultimately, that could be good for your shop as well. And really, there's no real risk to you, bar that company going bust, which they probably won't. And then you've got the taking it on yourself and paying £1 million down to get the transformer in and get the site connected and get the bays converted. And you're taking that on, but there's potentially more money on it. So it's the right site, the right time.
Yes, we fall again into that family business trap, don't we? Because that's big stuff even for a business like us to be able to swallow. And we can't run loss leaders for 10 years, whereas these big funds that are funding the big CPOs are obviously not making money at the moment, but it's all about the future value, the future profit. So I think we're in the wait and see category at the moment. Yes, try and get power where you can, try and get a CPO lined up, and then just assess each site on a site-by-site basis. I also think we talk about the transition, places like Primrose and Filey, which are right, we own sites right on the East Coast near Scarborough, basically those two sites are. And I don't see anywhere near the number of EVs up there as opposed to when I'm in York. And then I don't see as many EVs in York as when I'm in Leeds. And then when you go down London and the southeast, loads of EVs, don't you? So I think there's going to be a geographical element to it as well, where certain parts of the country will just be slower to adopt.
There's also a north-south divide in terms of charging points. Yeah. Really big difference between the two. Charging points per car is probably the same, but in terms of the infrastructure and availability of EV charging, it's much more prominent in the south. That's something that's also going to need to be addressed, because that hard stop is coming for everyone. If it comes, if it's it's yet to be seen. They wouldn't be the first government to go back on a commitment, so it might not be 2030 still. But let's wait and see.
There might be some fudge coming somewhere down the line.
Yeah, almost definitely. Thanks to Joe for joining us on Fuel Matters. We'll be taking a break for the summer now and hope to be back in September. See you then.